been chair of the committee. What's the name of the committee, Kurt?
Unitarian Universalists for Justice in the Middle East.
Thank you very much. So you can see that he's, and has many other activities in this area. So you can see he's well qualified to speak to us about this. Please, Kurt.
Well, I love the music, I love the fellowship. It's very nice to be here. I really appreciate being invited. I hope the message, trouble in the Middle East, won't be too much of a downer. I think we need to go through it, and then maybe we can come to a place where we can all live better than we have been. So that's the hope, that we can come through this trauma that's going on right now and arrive at a place, if we all work together, at a place that we can live better than we have. And the world could be a more peaceful, more loving place to be. So that's kind of the hope that I'd like to leave with you. But in the meantime, there's going to be a bit of a downer, I'm afraid. The cheerfulness that we've had here is lovely. I love the music. I love the story of the Palestinian camp. I've been on this since I was a 14-year-old boy, actually. I really appreciate the opportunity. I think we're now in the Middle East at a tipping point for a number of really major issues that the world faces and that we face. We have, of course, the human rights of Palestinians, and the title of my talk was Bringing Palestinians into the Beloved Community. I think that's something that we can all recognize as a value and something that we need to do. But also we might even visualize the end to U.S. complicity in the trauma that has been experienced for decades by the Palestinians, an end to that U.S. engagement and U.S. complicity in that trauma. Maybe even the beginnings of an end to U.S. imperialism, U.S. exceptionalism, U.S. Use of war in an effort to dominate. And I think we can all see that the U.S. military budget is extreme. More than half of our discretionary funds go for war. That money could be used here in McMinnville for schools, for parks, for healthcare, for all kinds of things here and abroad, that money. So maybe we're coming to the end of a certain number of tipping points, I think. Maybe colonialism, neo-colonialism, maybe even democracy. And it's up to us really to take advantage of this moment, I think, to move towards the world that we really want and that we really need, I think. Now is a time when our understandings and our actions might actually have an influence on the future events. Jeff Halper, who's the American Jewish Israeli, the founder of an organization called Israeli Committee Against House Demolitions, that for years he's worked against the policy in Israel of if there's a crime committed, you not only deal with the criminal, you punish the family, you destroy the house of the family, and in the effort to take more land, home demolitions is an essential part of the Israeli policy of aggrandizement, and that he said that we are really at a point of choosing, will we live within global Palestine or global Israel? And he contrasts one, global Palestine, as a place of a multipolar world that respects human rights and human life, as opposed to global Israel, which I see as integrated within the U.S. imperial project, and a world in which nationalism and fascism can triumph. I'll say a few talks about what's happening in Gaza, a little bit about what U.S. involvement in that, a little bit about what UUs have done, and something about what we can do. I thought I might begin, though, by a little bit about myself. I was born of a wonderful father and mother in Bahrain, in the Persian Gulf. My dad was an oil man. My mother was a missionary nurse. They went over there and met over there, and I was born just before the Second World War. And then came back to the U.S. during the Second World War, and went back after the war. And the little school in the company town didn't have a high school, so I had to go to Beirut to high school. And in Beirut, that was just in the early 50s. It was only a few years, maybe 3 or 4 years, after 750,000 Palestinians had been expelled from their lives, from their homes in Palestine, and driven into camps around Israel, in Lebanon, Syria, Jordan, and the West Bank. And I'm kind of imprinted there. They were forced into living in rather slum-like conditions, tents, concrete block homes. We visited a few in subsequent years there. And I was sort of imprinted then on the idea that a great wrong had been committed to a whole people here. And so I got rather imprinted on the Palestinian issue. After high school, I didn't do very much. I marched in Vietnam protests, but I wasn't an activist. And then, as the war in Iraq was cranking up, the foreign minister of Egypt said the gates of hell were about to open. And I sort of saw that this war as a real huge potential catastrophe, which I think we agree it turned out to be. And I got engaged in the large protests we had in Portland about the war in Iraq, and that continued. Then when Barack Obama said he was against the war in Iraq, and it had been winding down at the time of his inauguration, but just before his inauguration, Israel carried out Operation Cast Lead, which was a bombing of Gaza in which about 1,500 Gazans were killed. I think 3 Israeli soldiers and 2 Israeli civilians were killed in that war. And that just seemed something that needed to be opposed. So I began my kind of life as a Palestinian activist then, and did some things in the church. We had programs of taking the fear out of Israel, Palestine. We had an event on Pathways to Peace in the Middle East. We invited a progressive Jewish rabbi, and then the second week we had Palestinian activists speaking and so forth, and did what I could. In 2011, I went on a delegation. UUJV has had delegations to Palestine. So UUJV is a national organization. It was founded in 1971, and we have chapters, about 25 chapters around the country. If you just Google UUJV, you'll come to our website, uujv.org, which has all information about our organization. We have about, as I say, about 26 chapters around the country. Our mailing list is about 2,000 people. We try to generate activism and knowledge and so forth about this issue. It's been very difficult, but then in October 7 happened, as you all know, the attack of Hamas on the settlements around Gaza, and then the Israeli retaliation. And as the retaliation became so dominant, and more people were killed, more and more Unitarians got engaged on this issue. And so it's been gratifying to see a much larger engagement of Unitarians on this issue. So Black Lives UU, for example, has declared that there has to be an immediate ceasefire and the U.S. has to stop funding the Israeli military. The same with you may be familiar with another organization, the DRUM, D-R-U-U-M-M, the Diverse Revolutionary Unitarian Universalist Multicultural Ministries. They also have called for a ceasefire and a cutting of military aid to Israel. The UUSC, our National Human Rights Organization, Unitarian Universalist Service Committee, has also called for a ceasefire and an end to U.S. military aid until international law and human rights are respected by Israel. So I went on a delegation. I had been to Israel and Palestine as a student in Beirut. We went down and visited the West Bank and Jerusalem when I was a student in Beirut. Then the second trip to that area was in 2011 as a delegation. We talked with activists on both sides and visited different sites in Israel and Palestine. And then in 2015, I led a delegation there. And I became president of UUJME, and about 2 years ago, I stopped being president. We now have a very capable woman in Houston who's our president. And then in 2019, in the fall of 2019, I spent 3 months in the West Bank city of Hebron, which is kind of like a focal point of the Israeli project of taking over the West Bank. There I was with a group that used to be called Christian peacemaker teams. Now, because of many people like myself who are not particularly Christian, we call it community peacemaker teams. But they have teams in Hebron, they have a team in Iraq, they have a team in Colombia, they have a team in Canada. I'd like to first take issue with the statement that the attack by Hamas was unprovoked. The Palestinians had suffered under decades and decades of repression since 1948. Many have been killed one way or another. There had been a 17-year blockade of Gaza in which the United Nations had actually 2016, I think, declared that Gaza would be uninhabitable in 2020, uninhabitable. And here, people couldn't go. We know people who are blind because they couldn't get to healthcare facilities. So the situation was desperate, and whatever you might think of Hamas and what happened, and I wish they had killed only soldiers. I wish they had not taken hostages. I wish there had been a less violent, but the right of an oppressed people to fight in whatever means necessary is something that is sanctioned by the United Nations. So I don't think, as Craig Corey said, Craig Corey is the father of Rachel Corey, who was a young woman from Olympia, from a college in Olympia, who was killed by a bulldozer in 2003 in Rafah, in Gaza. And his mother and father have been activists for many, many years. And she, Craig Corey, her father, said, if we had paid attention to the oppression that had gone on for all these decades, if something had been done about this oppression, if we hadn't been blind to it, then the events of October 7 wouldn't have happened. So I think that's kind of a lesson. If you postpone morality too long, you end up in a bad place. So it's important to act when the moral issue becomes right in front of you. think we can go back to the same set of relations that existed before October 7th, in which Israel managed its conflict with violence and repression. They felt they could control the Palestinian situation with violence, and the October 7th sort of proved that they could not, and that they could control the animosity that is seen in neighboring countries with very extreme force and violence. But I think that Israel is going to have to recognize that that it has responsibility for half of the people in the land between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean, and they have to integrate together. My own view is that a state of all people, in which both Jews and Palestinians have equal rights, is what has to be the ultimate political system in that area. We have to, to me the brutality of the Israeli attack. Over 37,000 people have been killed, more than half of them women and children. The intention to actually starve is incredible. It's unbelievable almost. It's a medieval, I see it as a medieval brutality. And then to cancel the one organization, the UNRWA, the United Nations organization that was founded to deal with what Palestinian refugees were facing in all of the different areas around Israel, that is to cut off aid to that agency, which is the only agency in Gaza that can actually deliver food and necessities to the people of Gaza. To me, the cutting off aid to that agency is a medieval form of cruelty, and I'm very pleased that many countries, Spain, Ireland, Japan, Canada, Australia, have all even upped their donations to UNRWA. The United States and Great Britain have cut cut all of their aid, which were the bulk of the aid to UNRWA. So I think the global rejection of Israeli violence against Gaza has been absolutely amazing, and it's in the continuation of that rejection, of that hundreds of thousands of people have protested in the U.S., in Europe, in Yemen, in Indonesia, many other countries. And I think in terms of democracy, some 60 to 80% of Democrats, at least, and as Unitarians, I imagine a majority of Democrats, believe that calling for a ceasefire and a permanent ceasefire, unions, the United Auto Workers, the SEIU, the postal workers, the communication workers of America have all called for a ceasefire. Church groups, the UCC and the UUA have called for a ceasefire. Many of these have also called for cutting of military aid. Those are U.S. bombs, U.S. shells that are causing the deaths and maiming of people in Gaza. For me, the students who have protested in support of Palestinians have been the conscience of this country. That is my own view. And the frequent use of police to shut down these peaceful processes and the efforts of Congress to do the same are a violation of our right to assembly, right to free speech. I believe this repression is to allow for the U.S. to continue its support of Israel, violence and its damage to Gaza. I think my own view of why the U.S. is, there are two general explanations of why the U.S. gives its massive support to Israel and has from the beginning. One of them is electoral, that they want the money of rich people to support the elections. They want the votes of people who are persuaded that Israel is our absolute ally. I think that's one explanation. The other explanation is that Israel is very tightly integrated. The Israeli intelligence and U.S. intelligence is shared. Israel is a tight component of the U.S. project of control in the area. Biden himself said in the middle 80s that if Israel didn't exist, we'd have to create it. Alexander Haig said that Israel is our biggest aircraft carrier and we don't even have to pay for the soldiers. So the idea of Israel at a critical point in the world near the Suez Canal and at a critical part of the world that we need Israel to expand and to control that area in our own interests. So I think I really favor this latter explanation. I think it's the stronger of the two. And for that reason, I sometimes fear that Biden might be ready to lose the election rather than do what he could do, which is to call up Netanyahu and say, you either stop this war or we won't give you any more military aid. And there are precedents for that. In 1956, Eisenhower told France, Germany, England, and Israel to stop the war on Suez. He told them to stop, and they stopped. And Reagan was disturbed by Menachem Begin's war in Lebanon, and he told Menachem Begin to stop the war, and Begin stopped it in 20 minutes with a call from the U.S. president. So the president has the clear power to stop this, and he doesn't. And I think it's because of that Israel is such an important part in terms of production. They're the world's largest manufacturer of drones. They provide surveillance equipment and of all manner of Pegasus, you may remember. So it's too tightly integrated within the U.S. project. So in struggling here, we're struggling not just against Israeli ethno-nationalism, but we're also struggling against the U.S., I think, project of control. Now, some of you may not like to hear that, but this is my own belief that we have to end the idea that U.S. exceptionalism, U.S. effort to dominate the world is not something that we can support and have the world that we want. Most of us are U.S. citizens, and sending military aid to Israel is actually illegal under U.S. law. That several laws, the Foreign Assistance Act, the Foreign Export Act, the Leahy Amendment, all say that U.S. aid may not be given to countries that systematically violate human rights. So we're in a very dangerous time, I think. The U.S. quite some time ago stopped being the major producer of goods for the world, and their control over the world financial system is breaking down, with many countries trading in their own currency and not having to trade in dollars. That there's BRICS, the Brazil, Russia, India, South Africa, China organization is an effort to have a different kind of control of the world financial system. So the U.S. control of the world financial system is beginning to collapse. So that leaves really the U.S. military, which overwhelmingly, I think the U.S. has military spends more than the next 5 or 6 countries in the world. If you add the allies, many of those are allies, it's overwhelming the amount of money that is spent for U.S. control. So So I see the worldwide opposition to what's happening in Israel as both for human rights of the Palestinians, bringing them into the world order, and also as an effort to change the system in which U.S. has such power, and the effort to end neocolonialism, to have a world in which a multipolar world, not a world that is controlled by Europe and the United States. It's up to us as Unitarian Universalists, I think. We believe in peace, we believe in the worth and dignity of every human being, Palestinians as well as Israeli Jews. And the UUs have in fact acted in support over the years in many ways. In 2002, and actually in 1982, the U.S. declared, the UU had a resolution declaring that criticism of Israel is not anti-Semitism, and they called for an end to occupation of the West Bank in the early 80s, and similarly in 2002, they called for an end to the occupation. Let's see. Since October 7, as I said before, the UU actions have been really ramped up. I think there's a wide recognition of the massive disproportionality and the cruelty of the denial of food and electricity and medicines to a whole people, the bombing and the destruction of 70% of the buildings destroyed, etc., over 100,000 casualties. So as I said, the UUA has actually called for a ceasefire and obedience to international law. Black Lives UU, the Diverse Revolutionary Unitarian Universalist Multicultural Ministries, the UUSC. So what can we do? I would say we educate ourselves, become aware of the decades-long denial by Israel of the human rights of Palestinians. We can advocate, sign petitions calling on our elected officials to end unconditional military aid. We can divest and ask the organizations we belong to divest. Actually, in 2016, the UUA divested from Caterpillar, Motorola Solutions, and Hewlett-Packard because all of them are involved in the maintenance of the occupation, so that can continue. We can join with organizations working for Palestinian rights, such as Jewish Voice for Peace, U.S. Campaign for Palestinian Rights, and I have a sign-up sheet here if people would like to join the Unitarian Universalists for Justice in the Middle East that works for Palestinian rights. And there's now the American Friends Service Committee initiated a campaign called Apartheid-Free Communities. Some of you may be familiar with that, but this is it's been going for about a year now, and it's asking congregations around the country to declare themselves apartheid-free. It's really up to each congregation what that means. It could mean an educational program, it could mean an activism of working with Congress. So this is something that UUJME will be working on, trying to persuade UU congregations around the country to join this apartheid-free communities. At the upcoming, some of you may be delegates to the General Assembly that's coming up. I believe congregations has about we have 2 delegates. And anyway, there's about 15 of us from the First Unitarian Church in Portland. We're a pretty big congregation. And at this, the Black Lives UU, the Diverse Revolutionary Unitarian Universalist and Multicultural Ministries, UU Rise, which is an immigrant organization, UUs for a Just Economic Community, which works against inequality in this country, and UUJME are putting forward an action of immediate witness, which will be voted on and discussed at the General Assembly. you can, and it requires, something like this requires 2/3, the bylaws say that 2/3 of the delegates have to vote on this to pass. And so we hope that any of you who are delegates or know of delegates will support this measure, which calls for the permanent ceasefire, for the end of U.S. military aid to Israel, and for the participation of congregations around the country in this apartheid-free communities. The idea is that some of the big national organizations, the faith groups, have made statements, but it's necessary to bring this down into the pews. So that's the function of this apartheid-free communities. We hope that this can happen. So that's that.
Could we, would this be a time we could possibly go to a few questions?
Yeah, sure.
Pretty much out.
Yeah.
Thank you. So do you have other